I'm excited to share with you guys this morning. And I'm really excited about this message. And I'm excited about this whole series. I kind of love this series that we're doing called Love Matters More. If you weren't here last week, it's all stemming from a book by a guy named Jared Byas. Now, he's a really intelligent guy, theologian, pastor, professor. And he's just written this brilliant book that inspired me a lot last year. So I said, look, how does that unpack some of those in a church? What would that mean for us as a church community? And last week we looked at faith in our unwelt, which, brief explaining, unwelt's a scientific term because I'm so smart. No, I'm not smart. I know how to use Google. But unwelt's what biologists call different animals in different environments experience the world differently. So they each have their own unwelt. So I kind of unpacked how we all have our different experiences. So all of our faith is going to be different. So it's about embracing the uniqueness of our faith and becoming okay with uncertainty. With not knowing everything. Because we don't have a divine perspective. I'm kind of glad I don't. If I knew the, long outcomes of every decision I made, I'd be like a worrywart. I'm already bad enough. I can't imagine that. So we looked at that and we kind of unpacked that. And today we're going to look at something else, but I guess to get us rolling, I have a question. Have you ever felt that you had to choose between truth or love? Now, what I mean by this is for most of us as Christians, there's a verse in the Bible where Paul kind of talks about, speaking the truth in love. And a lot of times for us as Christ followers, we feel that we kind of get stuck in a dilemma where we have to choose one or the other. And we read this verse in Ephesians 4, verse 15, and this is what we read. Paul says, "Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ." Now, we tend to pull this verse sometimes when we say something that's truthful that really hurts someone. And we'll say, but we're speaking the truth in love, right? That's the most important thing, is the truth. And sometimes we've caused harm. I don't know about anyone else here, but I know when I was trying out the whole Jesus thing, not coming from a Christian background, I've had some people hurt me with this. And then walk away, well, I was just speaking the truth in love. And they would usually bring up this verse. And I guess today, what if I told you that choosing between love or truth is a false dichotomy? And what I mean by that is it's a false thing that we make up in our mind, because when we look at how truth is used in the Bible, it's used differently than we use it. So we tend to make truth about fact or correct knowledge. Right? Truth for us is knowing the right facts, knowing the right details, which I don't know about anyone else. It's getting harder and harder with the internet. You can Google anything in the world, and you can get these great write-ups one way, and then you get great write-ups on the other side. So it's so hard for us to figure out what the truth is, which for us is having the right facts or the correct knowledge. But the Bible, that wasn't the case. And we kind of see that in the beginning of the Bible, when in the Hebrew Bible, the word commonly used to translate into truth is first used. And it's found in Genesis 24, verse 26 to 27. And this is a moment in the story of Israel where Abraham's kind of getting to the end of his years. He sends a servant out to find his son a wife. So he gives this servant a special mission, some special instruction. The servant gets some special instructions from God. God does what he always does and comes through. And this is what we read. The man bowed his head and worshiped the Lord and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman." Now, before you get too upset and you're like, oh, it doesn't say truth. What are you talking about, Matt? The word faithfulness, the Hebrew word here, is one that we also commonly translate into truth, which is interesting to me. And we even see the New Testament use truth in a different way than we do. Because I believe the Bible uses the word truth not as an idea, but as an action. Truth is an action when it's talked about biblically. It tends to have this overlap with love as well. And I feel this is something that we miss as followers of Christ. You know, we kind of think truth as knowing the right stuff, getting it right, having the right doctrine, the right theology, and we think that's the truth we got to hold on to, we got to fight for. But I think truth biblically is more of an action. The Bible never asks us when it comes to truth to believe in it or get it right. Instead, the Bible asks us to walk in truth, which is defined as faithfulness, trustworthiness, honesty, fair testimony, authenticity, which I don't know about anyone else in the room. Does anyone struggle with authenticity, or am I the only one? I might be the only one. You might not pick up on it because I'm pretty open, but I'm still not that open. I still struggle. But authenticity, commitment to doing good, that's what the Bible asks us when it comes to truth. It asks us to walk in truth because truth biblically is an action. I believe all of this kind of shows us how truth is really a character trait, not some abstract idea. And I didn't make up that really good sentence. That was Jared Bice in his book, Love Matters More. So I stole that from it. So you can see I put it in tiny letters. So you thought I was smart for a little bit. But I think that biblically speaking, truth's a lot different than we imagine. And I think the Apostle John got this. And we discover it throughout his Gospels and throughout his letters that he wrote to the early church. Now in particular, I think of 2 John verses 4 to 6, where he kind of unpacks this idea a little bit more. Because John, I think, got that truth wasn't this abstract idea. It was an action. It was a character trait. And in 2 John verses 4 to 6, we read this, which if you ever want to read a letter in one sitting, go 2nd or 3rd John. I mean, they're like one page. I think neither of them even have chapters. That's how short they are. So a great one if you want to tell people you read a whole letter in one sitting. But this is what John says at one point. He goes, I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I was writing you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. Here, John does something beautiful where he's trying to paint us a picture, to understand what truth is and how it's more of an action. And he kind of maps out how to walk in love is to walk in truth. And both of these are actions. It's not a head knowledge thing. It's walking in love. If we're walking in love, we're walking in truth. If I'm walking in truth, I'm walking in love. That's why that verse, if you read it, it's a bit confusing because it just sounds like a big circle John does. But there's a point to it. He's trying to get us to see something. He's trying to get us to see that truth is an action, not this abstract idea of knowledge. And once we get that, it changes the way that we see things. So once our eyes are open to this, once we realize that biblically truth isn't how we defined it. You know, growing up, I'm sure I'm like everyone else in the room, I thought truth was having the right facts, which is pretty much anything that's American history-wise, it's correct. You know, we're pretty good in the U.S. But that's what I thought, right? That was truth. Having the right fact, having the right knowledge. Truth is knowing the answer to the math problems that I never got right in algebra class. But truth biblically is something totally different, and I think we've kind of lost that. But once we see it, we kind of can't unsee it. So it will change the way we read verses like Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15, where we say, rather speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ. Instead of us making a false dichotomy where we got to choose truth or love, we see that they go hand in hand. We see that to walk in love is to walk in truth. So to speak in love is to speak the truth. They're not counteracting ideas. We see truth is an ethical, relational category, not an intellectual or individual category. Which means maybe as Christians we can do something really crazy. And we can give up on trying to be right about everything. Because that's not the truth we should be fighting for. And I know that's a hard thing to do. I'm saying this as a guy who just spent lots of money on theology, and I came out with more questions. Which isn't good now, because now I got my tax form, and I'm like, what, I have that much of a debt for, oh my goodness. And they just made me question more, what's going on here? So I'm not saying this to take the Bible lightly, and that's not what I mean at all. But I think sometimes we've caused lots of hurt, because we think we're speaking truth in love, and we really hurt someone. And truth and love go hand in hand the way the Bible talks about it. It's an action. To be honest, truth and love, I think, are overlapping actions. And I hope that I've made that clear to you guys this morning. I mean, I often think in the Gospels, Jesus, if you look up how many questions he got asked, he doesn't give a straight answer. I mean, sometimes they ask him basic, I guess in their time, basic questions. And Jesus just, boom, here's a story for you. Here's a parable. Here's this. Who's my neighbor? That should be an easy one, right? No, he tells a story about a Samaritan. Like, what? Jesus, I asked this. What do I have to do to get into the kingdom of heaven? The rich guy comes up. He's got all the laws, and Jesus says, go and sell everything. He somehow shifts it back. He doesn't give an answer. He shifts the focus back on you. Because truth is meant to be this action that we live out. And I feel like oftentimes when I've tried to sit with the Bible, and especially when I was a bit too sciencey when I first went to uni, and you take biology and you meet lots of different people and you get presented with a lot of different ideas, I started trying to hammer down the Bible and is this true? And I feel like every time I try to do that with the Bible, it shifts it back on me and says, is your life true? Are you living up to the things you read about? Are you living up to what it means to be a follower of Jesus? Are you really looking after the orphan and the widows? Are you really following some of Jesus' teaching? Because every time I try to put the Bible under a microscope, it shifts and pins me under a microscope. Which is really awful, and I don't like it. And I wish God will cut it out, but he doesn't. He keeps doing it. But I think the Bible's meant to do this. I often think of how John starts off his gospel. In verse 17, we read, wrong one. No, wait, that is the right one, but just imagine at the top, instead of Ephesians, it says John chapter 1, verse 17 and 18. Just FYI, when God inspires you late at night to, fix up your message a little bit, make sure you check the top, Maybe shouldn't have done it on my iPad next time. But this is what we read. It says this, for the law was given through Moses, grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time. God, the only Son, who is in the arms of the Father, he has explained him. Jesus, for me, embodies true love, and we are asked to follow his example. Because he's God in skin. I mean, we have an example when we dive into the Gospels, when we look at the life of Jesus, of what God would do in situations. And oftentimes, if we're honest, it's not the stuff we'd like to see God do. It's the stuff that would probably frustrate us. And I think Jesus shows us again and again in the Gospels that truth without love isn't truth. And if we're honest, I think that can be a hard pill to swallow. It makes me think of an elective I went to. I was at a chaplaincy conference because I'm a chappie one day a week. So I went to, they had an awesome training session, great teaching, great stuff happening, and you got to pick these electives. And now being a high school chappie, I'm faced with something you're not really faced with in primary school, and that's supporting transgender students. So I'll go learn more about that, right? Figure out what to do. The guy giving the lecture, he's high up in the doctor community, like he's part of Queensland Health. He's a child psychologist, he's a professor, he's got all these things. But not only that, he goes to a Baptist church. So it's not just some secular guy. And he did a brilliant presentation. He kind of went through like the nuts and bolts of it, which I'm not going to go into here because you guys probably don't want to hear all that. But he went in detail with some things, which kind of made me have a little giggle sitting there. But towards the end, he got asked a question, and I think I was the only one who clapped for his answers, so I stopped clapping pretty quick. But I thought it was a great answer. I thought it was like a mic drop moment. If it would have been me, I would have been like, I'm out. But towards the end, we're all a bunch of chappies. We sit and listen to all these science. We sit and heard stories about him supporting people transition, about the percentage of people that fully transition, only about 2 or 3% regret it. Stories about little kids and, when all this stuff, when we've listened to all the sciencey things, and someone blurts out a question that I'm sure was on everyone's mind. But like we do, we sometimes wait till the last minute. So you wait till the lecture's almost done to ask a hairy question like this. But he asked this guy, what do you do with the Bible? He said, you're a professor and, you're telling us to, because throughout his thing, he kept telling us, you got to support them. How if you support them, it can somehow shift these suicide statistics radically. And this guy is, well, what do you do with the Bible? When the Bible's so clear about the transgender issue, what do you do with it? And, obviously, brought up Genesis and all these things. And the gentleman leading the lecture kind of took a breath, and then he goes, do you want me to be honest? And everyone nods, yeah. He goes, all right, the Bible actually doesn't say that much about transgender. It's like, if we're really honest about it, if you dig into it like I have, it doesn't say what we want it to say. And he's like, that can be frustrating. And he goes, I don't have a good answer. He's like, all I know, though, is when you support them, the suicide rates go down. And it was such a weird answer to get. To have someone who's smarter than I could ever be in that area. Like, this is a guy that's not just used for church conferences. Like, he's on Queensland council boards for these issues, for youth and mental health well-beings. Like, he's used in the secular world because he knows a lot. But yet, not only that, he's a Christian, he's a committed Christ follower, so he gets invited to speak at events like this and do electives. And you have that guy who I am sure has spent more time than I have reading on the issue, both scientifically and biblically. Because I'm sure that's got to be a struggle if you're a child psychologist, right? You're going to wrestle with that if you're a Christian. Because he's had little kids come in his thing. We're talking 6 or 7-year-old kids that he meets with. He says it's often boys before the girls, because girls can be a bit boyish and they're called tomboys. It doesn't work the same for a little boy. But he's had these families and people in his office and talking through these complex, serious issues. And he said, and I'm sure he's wrestled with Scripture, and I'm sure he's tried to get an answer. And for him to stand up there and say, look, honestly, the Bible doesn't say that much about it like we'd want it to. And then you have me clapping and no one else clapping. I was like, oh, don't in your pocket. But I think if a man like that, who's wrestled with it, can sit up there and be okay in the uncertainty and be able to share truth and love in a way where he never hid to us his Christian values. I highly doubt that he would hide his values if someone asked him in the medical field, but I'm sure there's legalities he has to watch, like with any profession. But he doesn't hide it. He walks the truth in love. And he seemed to have this knowledge that truth without love isn't truth. And I think to see someone like that do the stuff he does just really captivated me. I wish I could have got a chance to talk to him, but as you can imagine, you say a mic drop thing like that at a Chappie conference with a bunch of Chappies who we all love God and love the Bible, and there was many, I'm sure, in that audience who have theology degrees like me, so there was a big lineup to chat to him afterwards, and ask him more questions. And he was open for that, but I didn't want to wait in line. I wanted a coffee, so I went and got a coffee. But I just kind of think about that. And I keep having what he spoke to us on just running through my head, where again and again we tried to ask Harry questions, and he just pointed back to loving them. He would even make it clear that loving them doesn't mean you agree with everything. He wasn't saying to do that. He wasn't saying to go get your pride shirt and dance around with rainbow. He wasn't saying that. But he was just saying acknowledging the individual and trying to learn more and trying to get to know them and support them makes a drastic impact. So I guess, what does that mean for us as a church? What does it mean for us going forward? If truth without love isn't truth, how do we live out this truth of God that we have? If truth and love are these overlapping actions and Jesus is an embodiment of it, how do we follow Christ? How do we love others? Because let's be honest, Jesus doesn't give us an answer we'd probably like lots of times. I can think of story after story. The adulterous woman. He goes to bat for her. The law, everyone's just doing the law, but he goes to bat for her and shows love. Shows compassion. Tells her to go and sin no more. We can assume what the sin was. He never states it out in the open. But we also don't read of Jesus knocking on her door 2 days later going, just checking on you, you doing good? You staying true? Good job, see you later. We don't hear of that either. Jesus constantly presents something that is challenging for us, that is hard for us to do, because he's the embodiment of truth and love, and that's what we're meant to follow. Not this factual truth in our heads, because I can never know it all. And I'm glad I don't, because I already think I know too much, and God has to knock me down a peg sometimes. But I guess, what could God be leading us to do as a church? What would it look like for us as a church if we grabbed onto this? If we said, all right, Christ, you're the embodiment of truth and love, and they're overlapping actions. It's not just head, brain knowledge. All right, I'm going to do my best to follow you. What does that look like? What kind of people might God bring in front of you? What kind of places might God place you in? Because we never realize the power of those little conversations. We sometimes think God works in the big, you see the preacher healing 15 people, and that's where God is. But God's in the little stuff more often than we imagine. And just our little responses can sometimes make a world of difference to somebody.